My name is Fritz Steiner, and it's my honor to be the Dean of the School of Architecture here at the University of Texas. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Latitude 6. And this marvelous series of groundbreaking symposia conceived by Barbara Hoyden and Wilfred Wang and Kevin Alter are noteworthy in their scope and their depth and their ambition. The scope encompasses the Western Hemisphere, the New World. The events have consistently brought together architects from South, Central, and North America. Noteworthy this year are representatives from Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, and Mexico. To the south and to the north, Canada. And from here in the United States, we have representatives from both coasts, California and Virginia. In terms of depth, our speakers are asked to focus on a single project, and sometimes they do. This focus takes us more deeply inside the design process. And over the past 5 latitudes, we have learned much about buildings that have subsequently been even received broader attention through publication and really important awards. The ambition of Latitudes is threefold. First, they're really memorable events where new friendships are made and old friendships are renewed. Second, the symposia result in publications, such as this is the first of Latitudes, it's Center 16, put out by Michael Benedict and Kevin Alter, the Center of American Architecture and Design. And we're working, one of the nice things about being dean, I use the we word a lot, and that really means that there are other people working very hard. And in this case, that's Barbara Hoyden. And then Latitudes after that, Kevin Alter and Fernando Lara are working. So these publications, I think, are very important. They greatly expand what we're going to be talking about the next 2 days and reach a much broader audience. Third ambition is the symposia series has really become international, starting last year with the symposium Latitudes 5 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and continuing next year in Santiago, Chile. I wish to thank Barbara, Wilfred, and Kevin for their ongoing leadership with this event and their enduring commitment to it. And again, welcome. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Kevin Alter, who is the Sid W. Richardson Centennial Professor in Architecture and our Associate Dean. Kevin.
Thanks, Fritz, for that very nice introduction and kind of contextual sort of paraphrasing of the event. I appreciate it a lot. Although I was just going to say, the person who actually came up with the name was also part of the original group that conceived of it, which is Michael Benedict, who maintains his involvement and is, I think, with all these things, is always an integral part as well. So welcome to the Sixth Latitudes Symposium Conference, and thanks, Fritz, for so enthusiastically supporting this over so many years. Because I mean, for all of you that are in academia, you know these things. There's one thing to have an idea. There's another thing to make it happen, and it needs a lot of institutional support. And that's really been Fritz that's made that happen. I wanted to just start the conference with just a couple of thoughts Um, in many ways, I think one might characterize latitudes as arising out of a great faith in buildings as artifacts that are rich in depth and meaning. And ours, the people that have put together latitudes, um, ours is a proposition that the careful examination of key examples of architecture from across the Americas might both show us something of the range of accomplishment in the field, and in the comparison between the buildings presented, tell us something about the aspects of the field, those aspects of the field that are most compelling. So focusing on a collection of individual buildings from multiple places and cultures allows us to avoid the dangers of oversimplification and instead to dwell on the art of designing buildings as an entry point into the discussion of building cultures. In organizing these conferences, our hope was that, well, very much in contrast to discussing buildings superficially, as is sadly the sort of the case and typical in the field, and certainly in publications, we would have the time to discuss many aspects of a small collection of really accomplished buildings. All of these aspects, conceptually, discuss them materially, phenomenally, technically, circumstantially, and then to treat them as the complex artifacts that they are. In so doing, we see in the buildings themselves, for example, the way that local ecology has, the way in which a local ecology and culture of construction is inculcated into the physical artifacts beyond simple categorizations like regionalism, critical or otherwise. Each building is a certain measure of its place in the world, and through the collection of buildings, we see a measure of architecture's poetic possibilities. So in this regard, and with the benefit of being able to now look back on past conferences, my colleague Fernando Lara and I have been having a conversation about latitudes. We've been putting together the last publication, which we have a kind of proof to show you all later on. And the interesting thing about doing this kind of thing with a colleague is you end up having conversations, and we've had a really nice one. And in particular, we would return to the notion of buildings having an authentic relationship with their place, and the proposition that it's through this authenticity that each work is so compelling. Moreover, in hindsight, it seems that two parallel paths are often taken towards this end. Paths that you might also say are representative of two essential trajectories in modern architecture in America, but that's another conversation. On the one hand, there's a collection of work that demonstrates an atavistic or primal interest in materials, an interest in conspiring with and reacting to the forces of nature and the immediacy that such an approach brings. On the other hand, there is an exceptionally dexterous architecture of great precision and fantastic articulation. I want to just explain this kind of distinction. By doing so, I feel like it might be helpful to clarify the distinction by looking at fine art. So looking to fine art, I think is helpful in clarifying the distinction between immediacy and precision. Like the immediacy of a work, say by Tapies or Beuys or Serra for that matter, delivers a corporeal, emotive response, and the art is resonant precisely because it elicits this reaction. In contrast, the exactitude of a work by, say, Vermeer or Judd or Turrell, for example, brings a Kantian sense of purposefulness that reverberates throughout the piece. And this art is powerful precisely because it's so carefully tuned throughout. However, in architecture, this distinction is all too often divides between North and South America. And architectural scholarship has become all too comfortable in seizing two sets of values to analyze structures across the Americas. So while the plethora of codes and regulations, liabilities, those kind of things that are ubiquitous to the profession of architecture in the North have provoked extraordinary levels of control, this sophistication all too often becomes the singular virtue of the work. However, fastidiousness and exactitude, while valuable, aren't substantial ends in themselves. The accomplishment of meticulous design is always impressive and can imbue a building with a sense of thoughtfulness, but exactitude alone doesn't carry any meaning. In the southern latitudes, on the other hand, there is a kind of lack of precision, a certain rawness that is often romanticized as a means of approaching the authentic. And likewise, such immediacy doesn't lend to meaningful architecture in and of itself, as the rigor of careful attunement in design is required to make that which is visceral compelling. The collection of work presented in Latitudes, I think, argues for reconciling the potency of raw material articulation with the intensity of sophisticated constructional aplomb in this quest to create meaningful buildings build something that matters. So I think I'm just going to leave it with that. And with that, I wanted to start the conference. So I think we have David Gargan first, and I don't know who's introducing David. Daniel. So.
Well, it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce our first speaker, our first architect, David Barragan, who graduated at the Universidad Católica de Quito in 2005 and then joined the faculty of that same university almost immediately with a group of the students that had been collaborating already during their studies. In 2007, he or they created an office, El Borde. And when I was asked to introduce David, I was told that the reason was that we are a little bit anarchist in the same way. I don't know. But it is true that we share a certain architectural ethics, which I carry since my own student days when I was taught by modernists such as Milorad Pantovic or Neihard, who had worked with Le Corbusier in the 1930s. But I would claim that they actually did not know who Le Corbusier was, actually. And I say that because when I told Charlotte Perriand that when she was working with Le Corbusier, and I insist on with and not for Le Corbusier, that she was stunned to learn that Le Corbusier had been multiplying a correspondence with Mussolini's ministers in the vain hope of getting the attention of the dictator. And also what she didn't know and were shocked about is that as soon as Mussolini conquered Abyssinia, he sent to Mussolini, Le Corbusier sent to Mussolini a map, a quick sketch. This is how you have to rebuild Addis Ababa. And in the corner, there was a little note saying, of course, this is done without the knowledge of any specifics of the country, of the place. And this is where I connected with David Barragan, because this sort of universalism and good for all is exactly something that, as I understand, El Borde rejects. And in fact, it is curious that this little plan for Addis Ababa very much resembles what Lucio Costa planned for Brasilia. Indeed, I would say without taking care of the realities of the country. One of the most striking being that he ignored the fact that Brazilian cities live with and by the favelas. And the population of the favelas was never included in that kind of plan. El Borde, therefore, again, looks very intensely at local realities, which for them is paramount for a good architecture. Actually, what I was taught, and I found it echoed with El Borde and with what David is doing, is that good architecture does not have to be expensive. Actually, good architecture, the quality of architecture, is often in inversely proportional to the amount of money that is put into it. Last night, David was telling me how, being an academic, he was also an anti-academic. He's working with his students against certain established, received notions, which I think is one of the important definitions of the avant-garde. And consistent with that, when he finished his studies, he says that he had to relearn everything from scratch about what was architecture in opposition to the kind of notions that he was served during his studies of a poor country where all the models are somewhere else in Europe, in richer countries, etc., and with the manifest feeling that nothing of that kind can be done in Ecuador itself. What David does also, and this was part of his relearning of the trade, is to very closely, very meticulously work on site with the artisans, in learning from them, exchanging, creating a dialogue, sometimes without even any drawings, which, as he said, is sometimes a problem because you don't have anything to really show in a deeper way. But this kind of interaction with artisan and this kind of design on the spot, this kind of creation of architecture while working, while doing it, reminds me also very much to another avant-gardist, which was Antoni Gaudí. This sort of position creates a great contradiction in the position that El Borde has in their own country, because they are basically ignored in Ecuador, as opposed to the numerous awards that they get from around the world, which is a paradox given what they are trying to do. And he was telling me last night that recently they received as many as 35 invitations to go to talk, to present their work, while none is happening in Ecuador itself. So I am pleased to see that a certain architectural ethic that was part of at least some of the modernists is resurrected, but also transformed in a very creative way, with, in addition, also concerns for sustainability, which then was not part of the thinking, even though, of course, architecture that has to be inexpensive has inherently that character. To finish, I would like to present more directly the work taken out from an interview. So I quote, "One of the main characteristics that the practice looks for in every member is their capacity to enrich the work through their own point of view, knowledge, and experience. We greatly appreciate fresh ideas that can lead to new ways of facing the upcoming challenges. So working with people from many backgrounds is what nurtures the diversity we look for in every aspect of our work. In our country, the capacity of architecture to improve the ways we use, build, and appreciate spaces is not completely unacknowledged by many of the people who have the power to make decisions over the destiny of a city and its potentially emblematic buildings. We would like the people in those positions to understand the transformative power that a well-designed project can have."
We are citizens of the world, Latin Americans, and proudly Ecuadorians. These four guys that you see in the picture, Esteban Benavides, Maria Luisa Borja, Pascual Gangotena, and who's talking, David Barragan, are the responsibles behind Al Borde. And we want to thank to everyone who made possible that we were here today. And special thanks to Wilfred One, Barbara, and Kevin to create this space to talk about architecture in America. Al Borde is a platform to think and act in what we are interested in that moment, with no expiration date or absolute truth. We feel like driving on an infinite road in constant construction, constantly arming and disarming according to our interests. This voluntary mutation process makes us live in a constant construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction of ourselves. After finishing a project, we are in the same. It seems that over the time, we have more tendency to become a Frankenstein than a Disney princess. We are what we do. In order to tell the tale about what we do, and most important, why we do, I decided to do it through Las Tres Esperanzas project. In English, the Three Hopes. This project began in 2009 and it still doesn't have an expiration date yet. This tale began with absolute innocence, with a unique expectation to solve an architectural problem. We never expected, not even imagined, the project's transcendence in the community. La Escuela Nueva Esperanza, or the New Hope School, it's located in an isolated community territory in the Pacific coast of Ecuador. 15 families live from fishing and agriculture in 40 hectares of land, without electricity, sewage, telephone, and internet, unplugged of everything, a perfect paradise. A guy from the city arrived here 10 years ago, in 2004. He didn't know that in 2005 he would become a school teacher. The New Hope School began in this 130 square feet with a couple of kids. And quickly the space appeared too small. The active education the teacher has promoted was very successful and needed a bigger space. He tried to find the solution in the government assistance, but this is the government response in rural areas. A generic classroom out of context. It happens everywhere and any situation. Sound?
Little boxes made of ticky-tacky little boxes on the hillside. Little boxes all the same. There's a green and a pink and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to the university where they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. And there's doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just
the same. generic architecture that pretend to solve everything to everyone and doesn't solve anything. And simply take the particularities out of the project, looking for the standard solutions. So the teacher kept searching a solution adapted to his context. He had heard that we built with local materials and traditional techniques. And of course we do, but not in a romantic way, even less in a folkloric way. We do because we believe that common sense is the best way to answer everything. This house is located in a site with a high slope, and the soil had the best qualities to build with it. We made a cut in the slope terrain and create a platform for the settlement of the house. By this action, we obtain soil. With the soil, we build the walls, a house of rammed walls. Easy, it's just common sense. We don't need a green building certification to know that our project is sustainable. We believe in common sense certification above anything else. So, before understanding the context, the materials, the climate, and so on, which are inherent to the project, we began by understanding the teacher learning methodology and conclude that the school should launch the kids to knowledge, in a metaphorical sense, like a spaceship. The teacher was very happy and accepted our ideas. When he saw the model, he was more happy, and we asked him about the budget, and he said $200. And we said, "Are you kidding me? $200? Really?" We thought that the budget would be very low, but $200. $200. We entered in a total crisis mood. Suddenly, we felt powerless. We thought that it was impossible to solve a project in these economic conditions. We even thought to reject the project. And at the same time, we thought, what's the point of being an architect if we can work on a project that really demands our skills? We took our time and realized that resources and money are two different things. When we understand this, the whole perspective changes in a dramatic way. And the most interesting thing, this understanding works not only in social projects. We could translate this lesson to other levels. This project is about a different economy understanding and its implications. Although 50% of the world population live in cities, nowadays there are still rural areas where barter is the main economic model. We propose to incorporate this kind of rural practice into urban context in order to improve the life quality of involved actors and their city. As we didn't know if it could work in reality, we tested our hypothesis with a practical project with ourselves as one of the involved actors. We found an abandoned house in the heritage area of our city, Quito. We called to an economist and create together an economic model that understands the economic feasibility of an architectonic intervention based on barter. And of course, we did the first stage, our headquarters. The next week, we'll begin the second stage and so on. We will expect to finish the project around 6 months. We learn recycling buildings by a punctual intervention that could be replicable, adaptable, or transformable. So we are proposing a micro-intervention or of macro-scale ambitions, and we thought, what if each abandoned house had the opportunity to reborn? All of this could happen in our minds because we are understanding resources are more than money. So it's completely possible to build a school in the middle of nowhere with $200 budget, when besides money, you have resources you have on hand. We created a list of resources and realized that $200 is a good budget. Finally, we had a build-it-yourself strategy, and the community, the teacher, and us would be the manpower. And also, we did a volunteers open call. When architecture is dealing with hard realities, usually architecture as definition is the last part to solve in the equation, as you could see. When the teacher commissioned us the school, he requested an hexagonal floor plan. There is always a paradigm, a pre-existence behind each project. Our assignment, it doesn't matter of the ongoing project, is to understand if it was appropriate or not to solve the problem. A school with a single teacher should be an hexagonal, and it is clear why. Primary school in Ecuador have 6 levels, 2 levels in each phase, 2 phases for light and ventilation, one to entrance, and it's perfect, it's clear, it works. But it works for a traditional school system. This school promotes learning by motivation, and of course, it should work different. On the other hand, we wondered why people here in this community, in that beach, only build the floor plans as a square or rectangular form. And it's completely obvious. A regular form has less waste. Inherent sustainability. Later, we learn that they also build the square or rectangular floor plans because they don't have any external references. Highlight this in your mind. You will need it at the end of the lecture. We learn that they also build square or rectangular floor plans because they don't have any external references. So we decide to start with the basics. With the resources that we have on hand, we began with a square base, with a framed wooden structure. And of course, such a basic structure will tend to twist and would require diagonal bracing. We started with the resulting torsional structure and with the diagonal braces that are part of the structural system. Then we knew the cover couldn't be flat because the cover materials would be made of a straw, which requires to be inclined. So we put a ridge cap and take down the two edges. And finally, we rise on pilotis. And voila! We have a project with 6 meters square base, easy to construct, a space fully dynamic that promotes multiple uses, and ready. Now, let's move on to the construction phase, to the construction stage. With a 1 to 10 scale model, we worked on the hard part, the nodes, all of the nodes. We searched in technical books how to design these nodes. And of course, there were thousands of options. The problem was that a single node may cost the same $200 project budget. Obviously, it was out of question to tell the teacher the project couldn't be done because the nodes were expensive. We can hide behind the lack of budget. We must figure out a way to execute the project. So, let's look back. How were nodes made before the society has access to elaborated solutions? And we found that the nodes were sold with cowhide. We always had a great team of interns willing to do anything to contribute the design process, very motivated and very passionate, and they were the ones, Pablo and Javi, were the ones who went to search for the animal. And tests were made, and the tests were made, and that was it. And problem solved. The nodes are solved. So, the project was achieved in a very simple way. Everything was systematized, not only to be able to build with voluntaries, but also because it makes the construction process easier for us. This insane systematization is the lesson we learn because we were students of Jose Maria Science, and later we working together, and all of this information that he give us about systematization and rigorosity was recorded very deep in our minds. This house is exactly the same in systematization. One piece of precast concrete, 4 different assembly positions to solve everything: structure, boundary, furniture, stairs, and plans. Everything, order and disorder, are incompatible with the same system. Each wall is different and fits different needs. So, the project in the beach have to be solved with the same accuracy. 4 identical triangles, a square base, and a ridge cap. Simple. As less elements as possible. Everything was designed so that anyone could build. Remember, we were planning to build with volunteers, most of them without any construction experience. So, maybe now you're asking why we did an open call of volunteers if they don't know anything about construction. So, it's very simple. They really want to collaborate, and they're doing with a real commitment. With this attitude, there is nothing to stop them. Or maybe there is one thing that could stop them. A design that can build because of its technical complexities. Our master, Jose Maria Saez, always used to say, people who modulates, God helps them. In Spanish it's more beautiful because it rhymes. Al que modula, Dios le ayuda. It was not the first time that we built with volunteers. And it was very clear to us that everything should be modulated and easy to assemble. Inhibit works on larger scale projects, where it works not only on a modular basis, but also with modular pieces or elements creating growth patterns, which would allow to achieve the whole project in a very easy and rapidly way. And the volunteers, of course, are a vital part of the construction process. Coming back to the scaffolding man, we went to the beach, set up a camp, and started to build. With less than a week time, the project was almost completed. We didn't care if we finished it or not. When we are working with participatory process, the empowerment is so strong that the project is achieved very rapidly by the community itself. It is very different from working with charity logic or like a typical NGO giving projects, which are quite difficult to maintain over time. We really hate charity. My grandmother used to say, when it costs, it hurts. The context adaptation is inherent. We use the same materials and construction techniques with local people used to build. Wooden structure, elevate on pilotis, bamboo or wood walls, and a sloped roof made of local straw. The difference lies on the design. The project beats all our expectations. The teacher told us, half joking, half serious, he doesn't know if kids are coming to the school in quest of knowledge or to play opening and closing the door. Each detail was designed. The furniture, one of the keys of the project, was made of two pieces that are easy to assemble. This, what seems like a parametric design, is actually not. It is the result of an accumulation of errors of the back wall. It's kind of X-rayed of all of the errors of the back wall. And when working with unqualified manpower, it is necessary to develop mechanisms to take advantage of error. The project is so simple. Free plan to promote multiple spatial configurations and a big storage wall. That's all. And the storage is open so that all learning materials are visible and promote their use, and is part of the learning methodology to learn by motivation, because you have all of the materials accessible to the kids, and you can try all of the configurations. Every time that we go to the beach, the configuration of the floor plan is completely different. Before New Hope School, the nearest school was 1 hour and a half by foot. It was assumed that the story would end here, but not. The project was very successful, more than could expect in our best dreams. And they not only children came, but also adults who wanted to share and learn. The new community center would be 5 times larger than the previous school. Welcome to Esperanza 2, Hope 2. The problem begins with the location of the new project. It should be behind the school in this slope, behind the school in this slope, and completely open to the public, free of barriers. What if, in a certain situation, everything that you learn in architectural school doesn't help you to answer an architectural challenge? This is what usually needed for an architecture project: survey, standardized materials, skilled labor, architecture plans, construction plans. We didn't have the chance to obtain a topography survey. It would have been really costly. We didn't have access to standardized materials. In this community, there are no hardware stores, no regular shops, not even money. We had no skilled labor. The people do not need meters, no rules, not even use watches. We had to change our mind, because we also don't need construction plans. In this case, we don't have architectural plans, even less construction plans. Sometimes we don't know even what is useful in these cases, especially. So we had to change our way of thinking. We didn't have a specific program. The project should to solve multiple uses and be adaptable over the time. In these conditions, architectural plans make no sense. Oh, sorry. Construction plans, I always hear of them in architectural school, but we never understood well what they were really mean, for especially in these situations like this. So what we designed was an adaptable, constructive, logic system that led us to grow as much as we want, or as much as they want. Very simple. Tripod, and a ridge cap. No more. What is interesting in the process is that consciously or unconsciously, we are always pushing up our limits. In New Hope School, we designed the project and the teacher endorsed the design. It was built with the community and volunteers. In Hope 2, we involved the teacher into design process, especially in a situation like this. The architectonic programmation wasn't defined, so it was indispensable the teacher understand very, very well the system and be part in the construction of the taking decision process at the moment of the construction. In addition, in this time, in this second part, to understand what would be the best architectural program, we work on a participative workshop with the community, guided by our anthropologist, Paula Castello. And then we were ready to build again. The location of the first tripod would be to guide the whole building process. And we have to think a lot and try to imagine all of the configurations in order to decide the perfect location. Again, tripod, and a ridge cap. And so on. The construction is achieved in parallel. A team prepares the wood, another constructs the tripod, others put the ridge cap, others the secondary structure, other group the cover, another models the ground. Every happens in parallel time. In this construction is around 40-45 people working at the same time. We only have 1 week to build this project. Everything is built with tripods. Remember, insane systematization. When it needed to stop the growth, the tripod changed the position and stopped the growth. The project was conquering slowly the landscape. It is pure geometry. The quest of material optimization that we always are looking for would always lead us to search for the most efficient structure. And for us, simple structures of high performances are the best option. This pure geometry perceived from this angle in the air looks like this inside. Once more, the project isn't over in the established week time of construction. As I told you in the first project, it doesn't matter. The space was immediately conquered. The spatial potential was understood little by little. The limit of the use of the space is the imagination of the users. It can be adapted for teaching and communitary activities. Inevitable unexpected uses appear. And please, someone could please explain the kid that according to Neufert, this area under the pitched roof aren't considered useful area. Little by little, the space was having an architectural program. The community built the floors and enclosures, based on their own needs. The project was under construction over time. The project was built by them over time. Even now, 2014, they ran a new extension. The construction system doesn't leave any blank space to get lost. When they decided to extend the project, they reproduced the system. It's very logic. They didn't ask us for anything. They just made it happen. For us, this surprise was really, really lovely. The project has its own life, and we are needless, and it's perfect. The importance of public space is vital for every human gathering, and is more than public squares or parks. It has to deal with the construction of gathering spaces, which are not only commercial purpose. As a society, we turn into a shopping society, and everything spins around it. We always seek to promote public spaces which are detached from the neoliberal conception of consumption. Yeah, no sé qué, yeah, bueno, consumption. You understand what I through meeting public spaces. The train car 1513 has been selected to be part of the Railway System Recovery Program by the Ecuadorian Ministry of Culture and Heritage. But unlike other elements that are part of the restoration project, this boxcar doesn't carry freight or nor tourists. It carries culture and public space. The reactivation of the railway is a great event for the communities on its road. After many years of absence of the rail, these settlements not only recovers the means of communication and are reactivated economically, but they also recover, in many cases, their vocation. Cultural promoters will use the train car as public space activator in the stations where it stops. The project must be able to allow musical performances, theater, community training, celebrations, and everything. This means that the car doesn't have a strictly defined architectural program. The project creates an unconventional temporary public space. If Mohammed doesn't go to the mountain will go to Mohammed. And it's very important for us to try to looking for all of the ways to begin to create different public spaces. And we thought also that the public space has to be a government policy. It's very, very important that the government promotes different ways to enjoy and use the public space. Not only commercial and not only managed, but commercial interest. Hope 2 is a public space in the beach where everything could happen. Once again, we suppose that the project would end here. But it didn't. As I told you, the project now is the 3 hopes. Once more, the teacher came to our office with new requirements. It happens each 2 years. exactly January 2009, January 2011, and January 2013. And this is how we started the story of Last Hope. Última Esperanza. In Spanish is more. He and the community requested and invited teacher's house, a kindergarten, a church, and buildings to promote communitary tourism. So, independently that we know the context very well, we always try to reset our minds and try to begin from zero. These were the typical houses before we had come. 2009, this was the first project of the Three Hopes. 2012, they started to experiment with the construction of their own dwellings. The unexpected influence that previous projects have created in the community was really stunning for us. When we saw all of these houses, we can believe it. Really, we can believe it. For us, was hard to understand what was happening in the mind of all of the community. A fisherman called Jimmy has designed and built a decagon floor plan house for his family. He doesn't know to read, he doesn't know to write, but he designed a decagon floor plan house. Okay, with this background, now what do we do? Again, a moment of reflection. We continue with the new requests by community as if nothing had happened. But in this context for us, it's really easy to continue accumulating projects to our office portfolio. We know the context really well. We would even produce the projects more quickly. This time they need 4 projects. Or it could be better to take some time to rethink the orientation of the project. Finally, people are flying by themselves. We are professors at the university, and our workshop always deal with learning by doing. We always are focused on transmit this thing to our students, learning by doing. And always the hard part is the students' immersion into construction world. They don't know how to use, usually they don't know how to use construction tools. Maybe they never used a hammer in appropriate way before. So it's hard for them to design something that should to be built. But when they build by their own hands, there is a twist into their minds. And they understand that when you know the materials, the construction techniques, you think with your hand. We really like this breakpoint moment because it happened to us and it was inevitable. Our mind changed too. So, they know how to build in the a couple of images of the workshops with the students in different places. So, back to the beach. They know how to build, and they are experimenting with the space. So, what happens if we create a school of architecture in this beach? And we began to think about it, and we began to ask ourselves, what is essentially necessary to make architecture, or to teach architecture, or to learn architecture? And the answer were, first, to be aware of the reality that surrounds you. Regular architecture students are not. People from the beach are. Second, to analyze and synthesize abstract ideas. Regular architecture students are familiarized with it. These people are not. Third, to translate those ideas into a space. Once again, people from the beach are not familiarized with this process. Regular architecture students do. Fourth, to know the materials and the construction techniques. Regular architecture students don't know much about it. They do. So, if we create an architectural, if we create a school of architecture in this place, maybe we should to concentrate our attention in the subjects 2 and 3. So, we arrange a 4-day workshop each month. We didn't know what could happen, but we were really interested to push up the limits of the teacher, of the community, and our limits. Everybody was excited when we proposed to face the new projects like this. And everybody took the risk, and it was a leap into the void. We designed one workshop at once. This is a completely adventure. We are completely free to change the syllabus because we are the school as much as we want. So we can do everything that we want and begin a real experimentation on site. We don't even have a day to finish the projects. Total freedom. We have completed 8 workshops by now, including conceptual approaches to furniture design. We have 16 students from age to 14 to 72 years old. The design methodology consists in a process which starts with no preconceived ideas, pretty similar the methodology that we use in the office. Then the students make an exhaustive investigation about the variables that are included in the project. We started with the kindergarten as a real project exercise. So the students investigate the teacher, the children of the community in the age of 0 to 6 years. Then they analyze and synthesize the data into concept idea and concept model, and they did concept models. And this is the idea that they are working on. Then they translate it into a constructive model using local technology and materials, no CNC plotters, no anything like that. All of these are working by them. This teaching experience is changing our vision of professors and, of course, as an architect. We believe that it's time to reconsider the role of architect in the society, especially the role of elite figure serving to the elite. And the problem begins in the university, we thought. The problems begin in the university. Schools of architecture around the world are graduating architects with a few or any connection to the society. And we thought it's time to re-understand the whole education system. And now this project is our bet to re-understand this architecture education system. As you could see, we are very critics, but we are very involved in the process, and we are not only critics, we are always trying to test our hypothesis. Everybody who wanna be part of this adventure is welcome to the UEAEUE, Unidad Educativa Experimental de Altos Estudios Espaciales Última Esperanza. The Experimental Education Center of High Spatial Studies, Last Hope. Admissions are open to the fall-winter semester. Maybe the Three Hopes project is our extreme bet into unknown scopes, and we love it. Indeed, we are addicted to unknown scopes because it represents the perfect scenario of incertitude that we like. This process could finish tomorrow, could finish 1 year later, or never finish. And it doesn't matter. And it will be always a challenge to go there and work on an ongoing project or running a new project. Always is a challenge here. So, incertitude is the fuel that powers our engine. We don't know exactly where are we going, and we don't know want to know. We really don't know want to know where are we going. We prefer enjoy and build the present instead of care about the future. We learn to live without fear and without hope, without fear to fail and without hope to succeed, in completely a state of freedom, and keep fighting against ourselves, trying to be kids forever, believing that we can fly, and of course, enjoying each day as it would be the last. Thank you.
Hello, I am here. I'm Allison Gaskins, part of the faculty here at UT, and I am here with the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Betsy Williamson, who joins us today from Toronto. She is with the firm Williamson Chong, of which she's the same partner. She is, of course, the recipient of numerous awards, which you will find no surprise once we get into the work and we can see some of sort of that thoughtful and careful detailing that is included in her built work. So I can do this introduction very simply. Betsy makes beautiful buildings. It's a simple statement, however, it shouldn't be treated lightly. But I wanted to make one special note that is an important facet of the contribution of Betsy's work to the conversation today. She plays an important role as an architect and with her built work in the discussion about the role architecture can play in the spirit of the urban fabric and its development of the landscape and And so not only does she make that significant contribution with her built work, but she also serves on 2 boards, which I find the balance of to be fascinating. She's on the art advisory board of the Toronto Sculpture Garden, which clearly has a smaller scale, and then as well as in the design review panel for Toronto's waterfront. So she's having a hand in those pieces that we can experience as a single person with the art pieces, as well as bringing to fruition the future of Toronto. So I have to say that I've been recently reflecting on what a relatively brief window we have to make a difference in this world. And it's something that I find vitally present in Betsy's work. The range that she presents to move from the meticulous detailing and the materials that we touch and we experience the interior, and to see how that can reverberate outward into the city, into the street, into the greater urban landscape, to really deeply impact the overall fabric of the city is, once again, just simply beautiful. So the inclusion of Betsy's voice in our symposium is also critically important, not only as a guide for the future of the practice, important for our students to see what they could hope to achieve, but it's also important for the women in the field of architecture. So with that, it's truly an honor to welcome Betsy.
Thank you. That was a really lovely introduction. Here we are. I'm actually really happy to be the only representative from Canada because I'm all you've got. Like after me, you get no other information. So good afternoon. My name is Betsy Williamson, and I'm a partner at Williamson Chong Architects. I'd like to thank Dean Steiner for the invitation, and of course, Barbara, Wilfred, and Kevin for putting the symposium together and inviting me to present the work of my practice here. It's a rare opportunity to discuss this type of contextualization relative to the Americas, and I look forward to the presentations this afternoon and tomorrow. A very inspiring presentation before mine. It's just really, really wonderful work. As I was thinking about an approach to this discussion of an architecture of the Americas, it struck me to make the proposition that perpetuating the mythological presence of landscape is something that could potentially tie our work together. Take this example of a quintessential Canadian image. A freshwater lake in the Canadian Shield references the geological history of the Canadian landscape, and the Muskoka chairs and canoe, tip of the canoe in the front, are for Canadians in particular iconic references for how we use this landscape for leisure and recreational activities. This is as much a domesticated view of landscape as it is a natural phenomenon. It's also the site for a courtyard house that we're building in Huntsville, which is about 2.5 hours north of the city. The client is a Korean-Canadian family who were born in Canada but have lived in Seoul for the past 15 years. The design is based on the hanok, which is an ancient courtyard, an ancient Korean courtyard house. And this open courtyard here is made with a figured roof, and the living spaces are surrounded with this thick, permeable skin. So here we're, obviously kind of up from the lake that you just saw previously, but we're kind of bringing the outside up into the house, and then we have an open kind of area in the middle. Now, this house is very early in design, so we don't have a lot more renderings or images of it. Having the space to develop a relationship with landscape could be thought to be an American approach, given the physical landmass that we occupy, notwithstanding the density that we endeavor to promote in our urban centers. Williamson Chong Architects, which is a partnership with Donald Chong, Shane Williamson, and myself, is located in one such urban center. The city of Toronto, located here, is the 4th most populous city in North America and the largest in the Great Lakes region. We are located on the northwest shore of Lake Ontario, and the associated region, known as the Golden Horseshoe, which is highlighted here, contains over 26% of the population of Canada. Now, this may seem like a really impressive number until you realize that Canada has about the same population as the state of California. So what we have is we have a lot of land. Canada is a natural resource economy. Softwood lumber, oil, water, natural gas are abundant and sold to the U.S. as well as many people overseas. And it's it's important to note that they're sold as raw resources. This is going off the subject a little bit, but especially in the timber industry, our firm does a lot of research in wood and wood technologies, and one thing that we're really trying to promote in the construction industry is adding value in terms of technology prior to exporting the product. So very small countries like Austria and Germany do this very well. Canada does a very poor job. Now, there are some things that you may know about the city of Toronto. Jane Jacobs, on the left, moved to Toronto in '68 and continued to do great work in preserving Toronto's neighborhoods, much as she had done in New York's Greenwich Village. And in Toronto, she saved the Chinatown neighborhood by stopping the Spadina Expressway. In Canada, we really love the fact that Jane Jacobs chose Toronto. Not many of us are too happy with the fact that Toronto chose Rob Ford here on the right. And for those of you who don't know, he's the current mayor of Toronto, and he's totally blowing our image as nice, reasonable people. Yeah, blowing, no pun intended. Something you may not know about Toronto is that the city's primary geological feature is a system of large ravines that cut through the city grid. This urban forest is primarily designated as parkland and largely undeveloped, and is fiercely protected by regional conservation authorities. Buildable lots, because it's basically ringed with buildable lots on the top edge, that back up onto the various ravines are prized and are the most valuable in the city, already known for high real estate prices and land values. So if you picture Toronto, the city grid is up at this level. So it does step down a bit to the water, but basically all these buildings behind us, which is the view from the northeast of the skyline, is built on this road level, and all the ravines start on this level and dip down, and they're natural water courses and a variety of things. Looking at this map of Toronto that shows the ravine and figure ground, we see that our urban work is spread across the city from denser interstitial sites like these in these smaller neighborhoods to ones that back up onto the ravine system. One such project, the Bala Line House, is situated on a ravine that has an old rail spur across the bottom that connects it to the site of the former brickworks that literally built the city of Toronto. And here we have the block configuration. So you can see this is all the houses are kind of lined up here, and then the ravine starts here. The property line ends here, but then this is basically a natural conserved area. So as you can see, the house has a massing that slots into the existing lot designation and marches along with its neighbors. So this is the front here, and it goes back as far as we could, but getting a site on a lot on a ravine is actually quite difficult in Toronto. So as the front elevation kind of holds the front line, the back has to step back to allow so that there's no kind of tremendous runoff into the ravine. And this house is not quite done yet, it's still under construction. In section, great effort was made to reinforce and replicate the slope of the ravine as it figuratively comes up and into the house. The reciprocal view from the living room is framed and shared with the kitchen and dining room a half story above, and even from the front of the house. So if you open up the doors in the front and the doors in the back, you can actually see right through. And one of the reasons why there's so many kind of large movable walls is not only just for how it looks, but recently we've been getting a lot of requests, which is a little bit of a surprise to us, for houses that don't have air conditioning. And so the mechanical system is very light. It's a warm floor with radiant heat, and there's a provision for a condensing line, but we didn't install anything when the house was built. So you open up the front and back of the house, and all the warm air flushes through. So just to follow up on that last slide, so even in the city, we have projects that endeavor to capture the landscape, frame it, and create a domesticated experience. The primary focus of this talk will be a project that is set in southern Ontario's cottage country, about 2 hours north of Toronto. Cottage country is a term that refers to locations of recreational properties that are anywhere from a few hours to a half-day's drive from an urban area. Cottages are not exclusively for the wealthy, as they can range from small one-season cabins to proper four-season homes, and there's a strong rental market for those people who don't own. There's also a very large market in provincial parks of cabins and small cottages that you can use. The gist is that there is an urban weekend migration to experience a landscape that is typically a domesticated version of the Canadian wilderness, usually centered around lakes, but not always. Cottage country is socially, culturally, and economically distinct from the rural areas that it is adjacent to and with which it shares its primary resources. So I don't think I'd be going too far to say that Canadians romanticize this cottage experience. And I was trying to think today, like, why that is. And I still have snow on the ground in my front yard. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's because the winters are so long and hard that when it comes time to spend time in the outside, you really take advantage of it. So this is a spread from Cottage Life magazine, kind of replicating the exact same image of a lake in Georgian Bay with a canoe and a dock. The house in Frog's Hollow is a 2,000 square foot country house built on the northern slope of the Niagara Escarpment, here, just south of Georgian Bay. The site is 100 acres of eroded clay hills and protected watershed zones, blanketed with a dense field of hawthorn and native grasses. The site was not picturesque, but tough and rather impenetrable. When we started the project, the site was completely unserviced, with no road, water, or power. In fact, the owner, who had been coming to this area for the last 30 years with her family, couldn't even imagine that the lot was livable. What it was relatively inexpensive. And it wasn't until the first road was built that she was convinced that it could be developed into a place that she and her family could spend time. And we thought, well, thank goodness, because at this point we've gone down and built the road into your home. The Kleins are a family of avid cyclists who spent months on the property prior to construction, cutting in discrete mountain biking trails and learning the paths of the horses and snowmobiles as they emerged from the community over the seasons. So the site is quite large, but really the only usable land is fairly near the road because it devolves into watershed zones that are in a lot of non-buildable areas. So this is one such zone here, there's one at the front, and there's quite a few further down. So there's all of these lines on the property maps that you basically, the little rings that you can build in, and that would be about it. So what the family did after they bought the property is they had a townhome in the city, like a little condominium, and they would come out here. They camped here, they camped further back on the hill there, and they camped I think one spot right about here, and they would test the site to see which was kind of the perfect fit for them. Because of their connection to the landscape, a primary site strategy was to resist the inclination to build on the top of the hills, where one could survey the property in its entirety, and instead carve out a building area at the base of the hillside. The house was not to be a final destination, but a stopping place within their network of activity. A secondary reason was that even though it seems like the neighbors would be relatively spread far apart, the neighbor to the east decided to build their house on top of their tallest hill, which also happened to be right on the property line, putting this house, which is the neighbor's house, in direct view of the site that we were considering. So we spent a lot of time on site with the final plans, mocking up where the windows were and adjusting the orientation of the house to make sure that you saw as little of it as possible. The design of this project began with development of the concrete wall as the main organizing element. It figuratively clears the site for construction. It has a robustness that mirrors the landscape, and it formally added privacy because it faced the entry road and protected the house from the prevailing winds. And so this is the site here, showing the orientation. This is the road. So the site's flipped around from the earlier slide, and obviously the concrete wall kind of embedded into the hillside. So the section shows the embedded program in this wall, which we call the service bar. There was an opportunity for a double height space here, right at the entry with a stair. It held the kitchen and all of the storage elements, a computer niche kind of work area for the children, a large bike shop for their bicycles, storage, and a mechanical room in the back. And you can see we kind of took it right into the hillside as far as we could. Initial massing studies showed the relationship of the service bar to the second floor bedroom block here, which is nearly opaque volume. And the idea on the massing study was that this block here would provide shade for the living space below. So the delineation of the living space is actually the shadow cast. Now you juxtapose the model to the construction photo. This is a real conceit because it belies the iterative process of the design work in our office, wherein the initial form for the house changed quite a bit before settling on this final iteration. Initially, we always had this idea, the house started with a 9-square grid, and each of the rooms had a primary view. So this room looked this way, the room on the front looked towards the road, the room on the north side looked towards the view. And slowly over time and working with our client, we developed the notion of having this long service portion, and the house basically grew this tail and locked it into the hillside. This entry road image shows the private face of the project and how the entry is here with a little parking area, and you enter around the corner and you can see the glassed-in living space behind. The ground floor plan shows this again with the glassed-in living room here. And this is the stair to the second floor. And you see that we created a patio here that basically doubles the space, the living space for an outside space that can be used in basically 1.5 seasons. Now, our watershed zone started around this location. As you can see, there isn't a lot of tableland. So in order to get any outside activity space, we had to create it on the slope side of the house. Here's a view of the living room with a view to the bay beyond. And then turning 90 degrees to the patio where you can see the slope behind. And I want to talk about the transition to the second floor via the stair. Now the stair became an opportunity for passive ventilation. As in the first project that I described, there are basically no systems in the house. Part of when we got the budget for the house, it was much, much higher than the client could afford. And she said, if it doesn't come down substantially, it basically doesn't get built. So one thing we did was, okay, we'll just take out the mechanical system because that was a big chunk of money. So the house is heated with, it's a 4-season house. It's heated with radiant heat off of a on-demand electric resistance heater that's in the mechanical room. So there's no water, hot water heater. There's no air conditioning, and so again, you open up the sliding patio doors here, and you open up the clerestory windows on top, and the house gets flushed. And the only thing we had to do was fresh air with an HRV because it was required. So you can see the stairwell is light-filled, and it provides light into the center of the house below. And here's a section showing that as well. And here, the idea of the stair was to reorient you from the ground floor patio below to the landscape connection between the family room and the hillside beyond. So trying to kind of reinforce this connection to the landscape at every point possible in the house. The second floor plan shows that this has quite an opaque facade. So the idea here was to basically make something that could make the rooms inward looking as opposed to outward looking. The idea when you're here of the woman who built the house, and she built it for herself and her grandchildren and her children, was that when you come up, the whole family comes together, the house sleeps 10, and that you spend time outside and downstairs with the family and you don't go back to your room. So she kind of wanted to make the bedrooms as mean as possible. And so each bedroom just has one little window, and there's one facing each orientation. And then there's a large window connecting the family room to the hillside, and this is convertible as a 4th bedroom. You can see that in this elevational image as well. These really tiny slot windows are the only kind of light that you get into the rooms on the second floor. And this is just a view of one of the bedrooms. All of the headboards in the house were done in collaboration with a felt artist named Catherine Walter. And this was a piece that she did to echo the way that the landscape, you can see the striations in the landscape because the hills are so kind of eroded. This is just a winter shot. And even the bathrooms, just very simple, to the point, and nothing too extravagant or fancy. Now, part of the interest in designing the house was to reinforce this datum line, starting at the top of the concrete wall, going back to the hillside. So in section, as you're back at the hill, you see the tops of it kind of poking out here. As the hill pulls away and the house moves forward, you get the storage spaces in the bike room below. And finally, the house coming forward on the outside. And the detail sections also show this line. So this datum line is here. And it became really important for us in construction to to maintain that line. So the red box on top sits about 1/4 of an inch above, and the concrete wall sits about 1/4 of an inch below. We also wanted to talk about here the compactness of the floor and the wall section. So given that, you know, in our climate, you do need a lot of climate control. One of the things that we talked to the owner about was that the more insulation you put into your house, the better value it is. So using a highly insulated envelope is one of our kind of first strategies in developing a project when you want to control energy costs. A lot of our clients come to us with the ambition to do all these kind of more technical green systems, you know, geothermal heating and hot water, you know, radiant hot water heating, solar hot water, solar energy, and you know, all these things tend to fall away fairly quickly. But one thing we try to, you know, keep in and insist on is the better envelope you build, the less energy you need in the first place. So one of the ways to actually achieve this datum line, and one of the things that it meant was that the structure had to be doubled. So on the lower line, there's a system of structure here, and on the upper line, there's a system here of steel beams. And so one of the places that you see it inside the house is in the split between the living and the dining room. And I feel a little bit odd calling this a low-budget project, given the you know, work that we just saw. But I'm going to call it. This is a low-budget project. And there's a few things that we did. So again, the radiant floor heating meant that the floor slab is the concrete slab, and there's no finish on top. The windows were all commercial windows, and we basically got the biggest one that the company would make. We have it in this orientation here, and then due to the lowered structure, we have it a lowered orientation there. So there's a few nice things that we were able to do with fairly simple materials. So this is one of the obvious iconic moments of the project is the fact that it's embedded in the landscape. And often when we talk about this, and especially when we talk to students about it, there's always a notion that to embed something in the landscape, it means that you're treading lightly on the landscape, that it's a small gesture and one that is really all about tying the architecture to the land. Even in the model of this project that we have in the house, we really love the fact that the contours are really perfectly aligned and perfectly spaced up the edge of this wall. And in reality, it's a very different thing. The construction site, and when you build up north in cottage countries, the contractors are kind of like kind of loose cannons a little bit. So they thought nothing of a 14-foot straight cut on the side of a hill with all of this mass behind. We did have some clay soil, but it wasn't nearly strong enough. And you know, they thought they would just kind of, you know, basically go for it. And this is 2 days before a massive rainstorm up north. We get a phone call on Monday morning, and that's Mike, and we were trying to save this tree, by the way. Mike says, we lost the tree. And I said, well, how did you lose the tree? I said, well, you know, there was a giant rainstorm, and if we didn't bulldoze the top of the hill away, we were going to lose the entire hill. And I said, okay, well, that's an interesting conversation I'm going to have with my client, that basically all she wanted was this little kind of like, it's a 2,000 square foot house. And the architects come along, and all of a sudden we're bulldozing away like the tallest hill on her property. But the reason why they did that is, here we again talk about the strangeness of economies of construction. When we designed the footings and foundation for the house, there's only it's exposed here, and there's a cantilevered portion on the end, and then the hillside starts about here. That's our client Merle there, and then the hill slopes up here, and you see maybe 2 inches of the concrete wall on top. Now, to our eye, putting in stepped footings made a lot of sense. So we come this way, step up, come this way, step up, come this way, step up. So by the time we're here, we do have our foundation for frost, which has to go 4 feet below grade, but there wasn't nearly this much concrete in the project. Now, for economies, the contractor decided to use commercial formwork. So the value of the material was much less than the energy it took to figure out how to step the foundation. So he decided just to build it all the way down to the ground. And so basically, this entire concrete wall is buried, except for 2 inches that you see right at the top in this one as well. So the formwork for the commercial foundation is basically a reused steel form, and they get kind of junky looking. So one of the design details that we added in on the back was to do a board form wall. So this datum line here is the top of the window in the dining room, and you'll see it picked up in the next slide. And so here, where economy was an issue, they basically only put the boards in as kind of as long of pieces that they had laying around the site to get that effect. And in the final project, you see that here. So you see the hill is now all back, and it's kind of buried up, and the project really does look like it has this embedded nature. But in order to achieve that, it takes this tremendous effort. And it's another view of the courtyard. And here you can see this line. So this is a 3-inch board on top that wraps around. It's a 6-inch board below, and that's echoed in the board form concrete on that side. So this is the part of the talk that I call digital diversion, or I should maybe call it digital digression. One of the things that we try to do in our practice is incorporate advanced technologies with really simple materials. One of the ways to do that as a young practice, we did have at hand a 3-axis CNC milling machine at the University of Toronto because our partner Shane is on faculty there. And so what we started really early doing experiments with wood because it's light, cheap, and machinable. And here is a design for a door handle, and it was kind of a little experiment to figure out how to register a piece on one side of the 3-axis milling machine, flip it over, and register something on the other side. Current kind of objects and design pieces in the office is this table where this piece that you can't see here is in, again, CNC milled. This is going to be on a 5-axis machine done by some furniture fabricators. And the idea of that piece is that it's embedded in between the tabletop and the legs, and it's basically a friction fit for the tabletop and the legs to all stick together without fasteners. It's currently undergoing prototyping, but we're having stability issues, which should be a surprise to no one in this audience. So again, back to the early work, we looked at wood in particular because it was the suppleness of what you could do with curvature. We thought really nicely contrasted the natural material. And we also became really, we kind of fell in love with the artifacts of machining. So here, and this is a picture of this piece here, which is called Door with Peephole, being milled. And this is a piece that we did a number of years ago. And we still kind of put a lot of sweat equity into projects like this. So this was, designed, prototyped, and fabricated by, basically by our own hands at the Faculty of Architecture on the 3-axis milling machine. The peephole is here, and on the inside it projects out toward you, and this one is pushed in with this ridge, kind of making sure you can't get too close. So the technique for laminate in this project was something that we experimented with a little bit. You can see here, there's a 45-degree angle at the oblique angle for the laminations. If you're to laminate wood and have it go straight across, what you would see on this face would be a parallel line coming across the piece. If you were to laminate wood vertically like this, like a sheet of plywood, what you would see here would be concentric circles making the ridge. The only way to get the curvature to actually mimic the ridge is to laminate the material at a 45. And it took some experimentation, and this work is also highly influenced by the work of Tapio Virkkala, who's a Finnish designer, who did beautiful, beautiful sculptures by hand in the 1960s. So this is the 3-axis milling machine in action. And for those of you who don't do a lot of this yourselves, what's important to note when you see projects, and there's just a ton of projects that use this kind of research now. So this is something that it's kind of dropping off a little bit in our practice, but was really important at the outset, was that the machine, if you program in the code, and it will make the most economic roughing pass that it can. So the machine knows how to do that on its own. So these roughing passes here are not determined by us. These finished passes become really important in the design work, and it's something that if you care what the thing looks like at the end, and there's a lot of registration that has to happen, you have to go back and program in your finishing passes, these isoparametric lines, by hand. This is the built piece. So this was done in this is for an installation that was up for just 3 days, and so we made it in basically a recyclable foam material, so we could do the piece and then ship it off to the recycling plant, so it would be made into styrofoam cups and stuff like that. And so the registration lines that you see here, this is the bottom of one block. This is the side of one block, and the blocks are 4 feet by 8 feet in dimension. This is the second block coming toward us on top of it, and that's the third one there. So there's about 24 blocks total in this piece. The wall's 24 feet long and 12 feet high. But what was really important to us was making sure that these lines, which are very subtle in the piece, register these isoparametric lines across. And that's not something that you can do by just telling the machine to do it for you. You have to bring that to the project. So we, at the end of that kind of larger chunk of research and installations that we had done digitally, we very quickly learned that we're not the ones to make a building on a CNC machine, but potentially we could make parts of a building on a CNC machine. Now in Canada, we work to embrace the landscape, but we also work really hard to reject it. The rejection comes in the clear delineation of the envelope. We make a layer around the structure and fill the space between with insulation, not unlike a whale. So we've got the structure here, then we've got all of this kind of fat and blubber around. And our version of that is all the layers of insulation, vapor barrier, et cetera, et cetera. So the wall section in this project is this milled surface, strapping, airspace, ice and water shield, which is basically like a bathtub wrapper around the outside of your building, a sheet of plywood that holds the stick construction together, which is also kind of another North American phenomenon that we don't build in mass construction. You insulate as much as possible, and in our office, our minimum is R30, and we have projects that have up to R50 wall sections. And then you have the vapor barrier on the inside, so any moisture from the inside doesn't work its way into the wall through pressure differentials. And then you have the inside finish. Now, what this allows us to do, so we have thick walls, but they're not due to mass construction, like as in mass timber or rammed earth or other, concrete. But we have the layering required to maintain a constant and consistent differentiation between the interior environment and the exterior environment. Now, this gives us the opportunity at the outermost layer to do something that isn't necessarily tied to the wall assembly behind. This axonometric shows the second floor skin, the concrete wall here, and the wood wrapper that defines the glazed area, so basically the solid elements of the project. The initial discussions, we always knew we wanted to bring fabrication to this project in some way, and the initial thoughts were to do a customized milled cement board panel. So we got cement panels, chopped them all up, tried to find a way to, make them random in a way, but yet not look random, and it was kind of a disaster. It didn't work all that well. So eventually we came back to wood, which is a material that we use all the time. Again, it's fast, it's light, it's easy to machine, and it's really cheap. So the idea became to develop a skin for the building that could register the sun as it moved around the house by creating a skin that would basically make shadows. So we had 8 boards here that are all the same height, which is they're exactly 10 feet tall, which is as long as we could fit on the milling machine. We got them 2.5 inches nominal, 2.5 inches actual thickness. We ordered the boards extra thick, and from about 2.5 inches wide to 8 inches wide here. The narrow boards we only milled to a very shallow depth, and the wider boards we milled to quite a deep depth, up to about a ½ inch here. So we kind of scooped out a lot of material here. So even though in elevation this looks like they're all the same, this is actually quite a shallow board, and this is quite a deep board. The mock-ups that we produced to test whether this would work. This is a 1/3 scale piece where we took pieces of MDF. We literally milled each one on the table and put them all together. And you can see here on the shallow boards there isn't a lot of shadow cast, and it's a much deeper casting on the center panels here. These mock-ups, it's a little bit hard to read in this slide, but some of these are milled on both sides, some are milled on one. And one of the things that we had to be really careful to test for fabrication was that we didn't spend, an hour on each panel. So we had to optimize the pattern for speed in terms of getting these boards on and off the table. And although we ended up doing about 325 boards or so, they were only on the table bed for 3 minutes each. So it became a very quick operation, and we kind of figured the whole thing out so that our office could do it really quickly. And you can see here too, in this model, on the west elevation, the wide boards are deeper, and then the other ones on the end are skinnier. And this varies on each elevation here. Now, what was kind of funny is that we, the people in our office who were doing the milling work, we thought of, you know, whenever you do a project on the milling machine, the finished thing comes off and it actually looks really, really perfect. And one of the things that was quite funny was that we had a numbering system, so each board was labeled really carefully. It was very precious when it came off the machine because it was kind of absolutely perfect, stacked really carefully in a bin. And the contractor, Mike, comes to the site with a truck. The only way to get the boards out of the basement of the Faculty of Architecture, where the machine is to open a window and bomb them up by hand. So all of a sudden, all the boards are coming out of the basement into Mike's hands, and he's tossing them all onto the truck in another, you know, in more rain, like it doesn't rain enough. And the staff was just like, their jaws dropped open, like, what are you doing with our precious objects? But it all, you know, obviously the construction was impeccable, and it all kind of comes together at the end. The other opportunity we had for work in this project was at the stair, and so given you know, trying to incorporate this into projects, we had to take on things that were kind of consumable for us. So the idea behind the stair was that we wanted to find a way to filter light down through the house. We wanted to carve a way to allow more room at the ground floor because, again, this is a fairly small house. So we took the opportunity of an idea of milling birch lamination in this kind of carved piece here. So this is a study model for the stair. In this study model, you can see that it's a double-sided lamination, but due to kind of structure, we had to fill in this piece here so that this was just a little bit too wiggly for real life. And then these are all the pieces laid out, optimized on the sheets for milling. And again, we milled all the pieces in the shop and pre-assembled them in stacks of about 5 and took them up to the site, where we had a carpenter help us install them into place. So behind this panel here is a lot of really good carpentry that did not come from our side, but came from the carpenter side. And the idea here was to play with light against the milled surface, so you can kind of in love with the fact that the light rakes across it quite beautifully. Even in very small details such as this, you know, the one mechanical component that we had to have in the project was a fresh air component. But instead of just putting a vent in, we decided to find how many square inches of ventilation we needed, and kind of spread that apart through this kind of randomized milling surface. So behind this air are all the fresh air vents. And that kind of sums up the story of the house in Frogs Hollow. So thank you very much this afternoon.